In the news, we hear that AI is going to revolutionize healthcare. We see headlines telling us that it will diagnose diseases earlier or that it might personalize treatments. All of this is true for some of the population, because behind these headlines lies a bias that didn't start with AI. It started with medicine, and who medicine works well for, and who it doesn't see at all. When I was 18, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. Autoimmune diseases primarily affect women, and there's usually no cure. After years and years of tests and treatments and finally an experimental therapy that thankfully has put me into remission, my medical record listed a diagnosis for the first time: unknown immune condition. Not because the doctors didn't believe me, but because there was no medical code for what I had. I learned something through that experience. If something doesn't have a name or fit into a predetermined box, it doesn't get counted. And if it doesn't get counted, it doesn't get studied. When I began working in health tech, I realized something even deeper. If medicine never studied it, how do we expect AI to learn from it? So what happens when we do try to teach AI about women's health? Because, to be clear, it's not just under-recognized, it's also an enormous opportunity. Improving care across just 4 common women's health conditions: menopause, osteoporosis, Alzheimer's, and cardiovascular disease, represents a more than $100 billion opportunity in the US alone. And yet, according to the World Economic Forum, only 6% of private healthcare investment is directed towards women's health. Only 6% for 50% of the population. And of that 6%, 90% of it goes to only 3 areas: women's cancer, reproductive health, and maternal care. This leaves many high-burden conditions without research funding at all, including many autoimmune diseases. The opportunity is real, and investors are starting to take notice, but increasing investment alone isn't quite the answer. Because these algorithms don't just follow where the money goes, even when last year 46% of healthcare investment went towards AI. They follow how the problems are defined, measured, and optimized. And right now, we are funding solutions faster than we are defining the problem. One place to see this is in drug discovery. Computational biology is now widely used to scan biological data, propose new drugs, and accelerate early research and development pipelines. Many biotech companies have been using this in recent years to accelerate the time that they can find an AI-assisted drug, and some of those are now in phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trials. This is real progress. But when you look deeper, it's not equal. I went through a landmark Wellcome Trust and BCG study that catalogs 71 AI-assisted drugs that are currently progressing through clinical trials. And I looked at each one individually. I looked at their target, mechanism of action, what condition they would treat. And I wanted to know how many of these drugs are going towards a condition that disproportionately affects women. The answer was 4. 4 out of 71, about 5%. Now, let me be a little bit more generous here and include drugs where maybe the primary target wasn't women's health, but a major expansion target that they might move on to the future is women's health related. When I did that, I got to 6 or 7. We're still under 10%. That's not all. When I dug even deeper, the pattern that we saw before still holds. The 6 or 7 drugs that I just talked about were all related to oncology and women's cancers. AI was just solving the same problems that human medicine already had. And this problem doesn't just apply to women. We also see the same patterns against race and ethnicity. Black patients and people of color are disproportionately missing from the data sets. This isn't a failure of technology. The technology is very good at finding patterns within the data, but it can't find patterns from what never existed. This also leads into clinical trials, the next stage after drug discovery. Did you know that women weren't included in clinical trials in the US until 1993? And did you know that pregnant women and women with many chronic conditions are still excluded from most trials? If someone isn't counted, if they're not studied, we can't expect AI to learn from it. So, how do we actually fix this? There's no single answer, but I'd like to share 3 potential paths forward, each with its own merits and risks. The first path is the most obvious. Collect more data on women. Fund more studies that include women, and require clinical trials to report the outcomes by sex and race. This is the obvious thing to do, you might say, and in fact, it's already starting to happen. The US FDA now mandates that clinical trial sponsors submit diversity action plans and requires that all phase 3 trials be designed in a way to analyze whether outcomes differ by sex or race. These are meaningful policy steps, but policies, laws, and actual enrollment are 2 very different things. Studies found that even after these mandates, women still made up only 37% of trials that enrolled both sexes, and minority groups continue to be severely underrepresented. More data is necessary, but it's going to take decades to collect it, and we're moving fast in AI now. We don't have that time. That leads us to the second path, synthetic data. The idea here is that if you don't have real-world data on women, for example, you can use an AI to generate it and substitute it for the data that you've never collected. This shows a lot of promise, and researchers are already looking into it, but it comes with one major risk. If you build a synthetic data set off the back of a biased original data set, you don't close the gap. You can actually widen it. In a 2025 study, researchers were trying to tackle a problem that every hospital system faces. Patient records contain sensitive personal information, which limits who's able to view them and how they can be used. Synthetic EHRs have emerged as a potential solution to this. We can create new synthetic patient data and then use it to train new clinical tools and workflows that a hospital might want to implement. This sounds great, but the researchers thought, is this safe? So they designed an experiment where they developed a patient data set of 140,000 artificial records covering 20 diseases. And they looked at it, and it wasn't safe. In, for example, conditions with a slight male skew, like hypertension, which is high blood pressure, the patient record, the data set, was 96% male. It's about 52% of men that have hypertension in the real world. In the end, it wasn't a good substitute, and had it been used to train clinical systems, it could have led to biased downstream training effects. That leaves us with the third path. There's a set of statistical tools called subgroup analysis or stratified modeling that we can use to change the question we're asking. Instead of telling an AI system, look at all of this data and find the best pattern, we can tell it, look at this group separately. Look at women separately. Even if we don't have all the data, even if the data set is smaller or noisier, and even if we may have to be comfortable with slightly larger confidence intervals than we've historically been used to. A 2022 study from UCL showed what happened when you don't do this. researchers were looking at 4 commonly used algorithms that doctors use to detect liver disease. And all of these had accuracy rates above 70%. And they did hit that on the average. But when you looked into it, they weren't equal by gender. The algorithms missed 44% of the liver disease cases in women, but only 23% in men. In fact, the algorithm that had the highest accuracy rating had the biggest gender gap. And when researchers tried to figure out why this was, they understood that the biological markers for liver disease that these algorithms were trained on are actually not as indicative of liver disease in women. It wasn't the technology that was biased. It had inherited it from medical diagnostic categories that have likely existed for decades. This is why the subgroup modeling approach is so important. It makes it visible. We can see where there's bias in our data, and we may need to improve upon it. None of these 3 paths is going to be sufficient on its own. More data takes time, synthetic data has risks, and statistics and math only go so far when you don't have all the data that you need in the first place. We need to be honest about the state of our medical data and the inherent biases that we see in it. In this way, we should think of AI as a mirror. It's reflecting the areas that we need to take a closer look at. It shouldn't just be trusted blindly. This might sound bad, but I want to propose that we take this moment to do something different. Instead of just letting AI repeat the same biases, the same mistakes over and over again, repeating history at a faster speed and a greater scale, we can stop and try to teach the AI what we've never taught it before. Because healthcare is not going to be changed by how powerful our algorithms are or how great our technology is. We're going to change healthcare by what we choose to teach it. And if we choose to teach AI what medicine has historically ignored, we don't just make technology fair. We make healthcare better for women and for everyone. Thank you.